The glory of the cinema is that it is an audience that is seeing it, and therefore it is a collective understanding, which is quite different from watching something on tape. It has a blend of the actual theatre itself, even though what you're going to see is always exactly the same. It can vary from audience to audience according to whatever collection of people you have there.
The first screening of the movie, which ran, I think, about 4 hours long, from a 78-page screenplay. And we were supposed to go out to lunch afterwards. I was with my ex-wife, and she was so traumatized, she couldn't leave the room for a day and a half. It was more violent and more frightening, actually, at the long cut than it ended up to be.
We never really previewed it till we finished the film, which was interesting. But we finished it, and we had a 70mm print, and we took it to Fox. And they insisted the day we arrived, we just arrived that afternoon, that they wanted to run it that night in their dubbing theatre, the Zanuck Theatre. And they invited all the science fiction sort of people who had come in dressed up as most of the creatures you'd ever seen to see the film. And it ran terribly because the sound was so bad in there. And we never could understand it because we had a great soundtrack. We've never changed it.
Then we had one in St. Louis where the sound wasn't quite right, and that was okay.
Ridley went crazy because he went down and checked the theater before the screening, and 2 of the speakers were out, and then he didn't want to screen the picture.
And by this time, they are completely convinced that we'd made a bad soundtrack in England, and the wrong thing had arrived.
But we were all quite worried after the one in St. Louis. And then in Dallas, the next night, we had the sound absolutely right in the theater.
Let's get out of here.
We've got this far, we must go on.
We arrive in this theatre, which was run by these guys. You could have eaten off their floor. The theatre was fantastic. The sound was great. It was the most incredible preview I've ever been in. I mean, people were screaming and running out of the theatre.
From what I remember, Ridley and Ivor Powell were holding down Alan Ladd Jr., who was trying to get out of the cinema.
The usher keeled over, and not with a chest burster scene, strangely enough. People were just too stunned at that particular moment that they didn't react.
This was a through-the-roof preview. This is when we knew we really had something. In fact, there was one of the ushers fainted. They're all, they were worried about violence in the theaters and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And said, "Oh my God, there's an incident here. What's happened?" And the usher had fainted when the robot's head came off.
We had the management saying, this is terrible. All the people are being sick everywhere, and it's in a state. And we thought, this is great.
At first, I was standing in the back of the theater. I was saying, "What's going on? People are getting a lot of walkouts, But what it was that people were sitting close to the screen or walking back to stand and watch it in the back of the theater. They didn't want to be that close to the screen, because it was scary.
Some of the most exciting, I think, moments of my life, because there's no greater buzz than being involved in a movie, and suddenly, not only was I going to the States for the first time in my life, but I was actually being flown around with Ridley in the 20th Century Fox executive jet from preview to preview.
We never had a premiere for this movie. And I paid for my own ticket down at Egyptian Theatre to go, and I stood in line to go see this movie. I mean, it was like so totally bizarre. I wanted to see it with with an audience. People were getting up and leaving the theater and going out and barfing in the lobby. I mean, I guess it was just such a shock to everyone. I mean, we knew how it was made, and it was, our friend on the little dolly being squidgied underneath the chair and stuff. But boy, I tell you, when it was cut together, it really was pretty amazing.
When we opened the film, I was staying at a friend's house in the Hollywood Hills there, looking down. I could see the Egyptian theatre where I was. And they opened it and they ran it for 48 hours non-stop. It was just running like a loop for 48 hours. There was never a moment in that 48 hours that the queue wasn't round the block.
I got up that day. I was a complete nervous wreck. I was angry. I was angry at the world. I had not been shown proper respect on this movie. I wasn't even going to go to the opening. The hell with them. I'm not going to go to the opening of this thing.
Dan somehow had a bad experience. I remember this sticks out of my mind because of Dark Star. He remembers coming and thinking, "Mom, my God, and nobody laughed, and nobody responded, and nobody came. And when they did, they didn't laugh at any of the jokes." That's what he said to me, "I'll never try another comedy again." So he kept on feeling this fear that it was going to fall on its face like Dark Star did.
I jumped in my car and I just drove around streets. I drove around L.A. crazily. Nowhere. I just drove. I was mad. I'll show him. I'll this. I'll that.
I guess he got drunk or something because he almost didn't want to come. He said, "I can't take it."
I'm not going to that. At 7:55, I suddenly turned the wheel and ran. I drove like a rocket into Hollywood. I drove up and I parked somewhere and I got out. And I saw this huge line of people. It went down the block and around the block. And I said, "Is that for Alien?" And I got out and I walked the whole length of the line. I walked all this long line. They were all lined up to see Alien, my movie. And I sort of walked up. I drifted up towards the opening, the entrance there of the Egyptian. And I got up there, and there was Ronnie Shusett and a couple of people.
He was like a man possessed. I mean, he was just like terrified.
They said, "Where you been? Come in here." And they took me in, and we went inside. I floated in, and the theater, every seat was full, and they put me down in a seat somewhere, and I sat there. I was kind of numb. It was like a dream. The house lights went down. The 20th Century Fox logo came up, and the whole audience cheered. Yay!
And we heard these tremendous shrieks and cheers and applause. And about the third scare in, and Dan was sitting behind me, and he started weeping.
And my eyes flooded with tears, and the tears just ran down my face. And I just sat there and watched the movie.
And I said, Dan, and he said, "I can't believe it. It's real. It's real." You know, and he was just like crying through the whole. Here's everybody cheering. He's this guy behind me crying.
Limp as a rag. And I had expected there, of course, to be moments where they would scream at the shock. And I'd expected a lot of nervous muttering and tittering, all that stuff. Wasn't what happened at all. The audience sat in absolute silence, unmoving, just staring at that screen.
Like all of us, we can't be objective about our own work. Even when he went to the previews, he just wasn't sure. He thought, "Oh, maybe it's just those audiences are they're prone to love it, and nobody else is going to like it. Maybe not the masses that aren't the science fiction lovers." But you could tell that crowd, they went wild. I mean, they were just standing and cheering at the end of the movie.
I saw it at the Egyptian. First time I saw it in its entirety. A lot of them had come up and were standing in front. They'd walked out on the movie. And I thought, cool, it can't be that bad, right? So I go in there, watch the movie, right? And I'm quite excited by what's happening. And I thought the pacing, cutting was brilliant, right? And then when Sigourney goes back to pick up her cat, I had this wonderful African-American voice shouting out, "Leave the fucking cat!" And at that stage, I knew that Ridley had got a hit on it.